Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 100 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 3. And we are in the last chapter, chapter 33, and we're sort of, not exactly in the middle, but somewhere close to being in the middle of the third chapter. So we're carrying on. We may finish today. If not, we'll definitely finish tomorrow. But for the time being, let us chant our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyatya Deshatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchkalpatarubhyas cha kripa sindubhya eva cha Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Right, so, and again, let me just remind you that right outside here is the kitchen, and they're cooking for all the senior devotees. It's a bit of quite an operation. So you hear that. Anyway, from time to time, you'll hear some things, but don't worry. You'll also hear what we say quite clearly. And so now we're going on to the third section, verse 9 to verse 12. Kapila replies to Devahuti and leaves home. So again, it's a short section. It's 4 verses. So I'm not going to read just the verses and then come back and read them again and then do the purports. We'll just go straight through. Right, Kapila replies to Devahuti and leaves home, verse 9 to verse 12. Verse 9, thus the Supreme Personality of Godhead Kapila, satisfied by the words of his mother, towards whom he was very affectionate, replied with gravity. So there's just extremely short purport. Let's just read the whole thing. Since the Lord is all perfect, his exhibition of affection for his mother was also complete. After hearing the words of his mother, he most respectfully, with due gravity and good manners, replied. That's verse 9 and its purport. So on we go to verse 10. The personality of Godhead said, my dear mother, the path of self-realization, which I've already instructed to you, is very easy. You can execute this system without difficulty, and by following it, you shall very soon be liberated, even within your present body. So, okay, let's have a look at the purport. There's a more substantial purport here. So Prabhupada says, devotional service is so perfect that if we just follow the rules under the direction of the spiritual master, will be liberated even within this body. In other yoga processes, you don't really know what's going to happen, or in the empiric philosophical process, who knows what's going to happen, whether you're going to be able to reach the perfectional stage, because according to the descriptions we've been reading here, particularly in this third canto, without bhakti, without devotional service, you can't achieve perfection. You might be able to make some progress in a certain sense, like in the sense of more renunciation, or you might develop some mystical powers, for example, in Ashtanga Yoga. But these considerations are not important. What's really important for achieving perfection is to really get into bhakti, into devotional service. So therefore, Prabhupada says here that in devotional service, if you have faith in the instructions of the spiritual master, and if you follow the rules, you're sure to be liberated, even in this body. So, and then Srila Prabhupada refers to Srila Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. He speaks the famous verse, very nice verse. This is just the first line. Iha yasya harir darsye. And then it goes on, Karamana manasagira, Nikolas vapyavastasu, jivan mukta sochate. That makes the point of, regardless of what your situation is, anyone whose aim is to please the Lord under the spiritual master is called Jivan Mukta, one who's liberated even within this body. So, Prabhupada makes an interesting point. Sometimes the neophytes are doubtful about whether or not the spiritual master is liberated. Sometimes Prabhupada says neophytes are doubtful about the bodily affairs of the spiritual master. These things happen. But the point is, Prabhupada makes, the point of liberation is not just to see the bodily symptoms of the spiritual master, but to see the spiritual symptoms. As long as someone is fully situated in the service of the Lord, then he should be understood to be liberated. In simple terms, that's the principle. That is the principle. Jivan Mukta. Even though living in a material body, which has certain material necessities to eat, to sleep, and things like this, but because a person is fully absorbed in devotional service, then automatically it means he's liberated. And fully engaged in devotional service, of course, means that regardless of having to look after the material body, just in simple terms, as long as the standards of the moral standards, no meat, fish, or eggs, etc., etc., as long as those things are maintained, then the person is fully absorbed in devotional service. So there's a second paragraph here. Prabhupada says, liberation entails being situated in one's own position, means one's natural, eternal, spiritual position. That the Bhagavatam says, Muktir hitvanyata rupam swarupena vyavastati. You can see there, Prabhupada didn't actually quote the whole of those. It's two lines. Muktir hitvanyata rupam, first line. Swarupena vyavastati, second line. So this is the definition, that the actual identity of the living entity, as described by Lord Chaitanya, is to be the eternal servant of Krishna. Yeah. So therefore, if someone is 100% engaged in devotional service, they're liberated. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, one must understand whether or not he is liberated by his activities in devotional service, not by other symptoms. So on we go, devotees. Verse 11. My dear mother, those who are actually transcendentalists certainly follow my instructions as I've given them to you. You may rest assured that if you traverse this path of self-realization perfectly, surely you shall be freed from fearful material contamination and shall ultimately reach me. Mother, persons who are not conversant with this method of devotional service certainly cannot get out of the cycle of birth and death. So again, there's a very, very short purport here. Let me just read it. Material existence is full of anxiety, and therefore it is fearful. One who gets out of this material existence automatically becomes free from all anxieties and fear. One who follows the path of devotional service enunciated by Lord Kapila is very easily liberated. So we go on now to verse 12. Sri Maitreya said, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Kapila, after instructing his beloved mother, took permission from her and left his home, his mission having been fulfilled. Yeah, so that's it. Lord Kapila is now leaving home, just as Kardama Muni left home, to just absorb himself fully in Krishna consciousness and whatever else may be there in his mission. Let's get into the purport of verse 12, short, not a long purport. So Lord Kapila's mission in appearing was to distribute the Sankhya philosophy, which as we saw in such detail, it's just full of devotional service. It's just overflowing with devotional service. So, therefore, having done that, having distributed Sankhya philosophy to his mother, and then through her to the world, Kapila didn't need to stay at home. So he took permission from her and left. Yeah. And as far as we can see, he went for self-realization. I mean, he's got nothing to realize spiritually. He's already fully realized. Beyond fully realized, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Vishnu. But he's setting an example here. Prabhupada says, therefore, this is an example set by the Lord while acting like an ordinary human being, so that others can learn from him. He could have stayed at home with his mother. She's a pure devotee. Could have done that. But he chose not to. There was no need. He didn't need to. She didn't need him to, because she's already fully God conscious. So the point, though, is that it's best to stay alone as a brahmachari, sannyasi, or vanaprastha and cultivate Krishna consciousness throughout life. Kapila, if we look at him in terms of varnashram dharma, he's not a householder. Householder means a married person. So he's more like sannyasi, really. I mean, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, yeah. So, therefore, it's best for him. Stay alone in whatever varnashram sort of situation he may feel is preferable for him, and just cultivate Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, those who are unable to remain alone are given license to live in household life with wife and children, not for sense gratification, but for cultivation of Krishna consciousness. So, devotees, we go on now to the fourth section, which is from verse 13 to verse 29. So it's a long section, 17 verses it seems. Devahuti follows the instructions of Kapila. That's the name. So let us read through the verses first of all. 13. As instructed by her son, Devahuti also began to practice Bhakti Yoga in that very ashram. She practiced Samadhi in the house of Kardama Muni, which was so beautifully decorated with flowers that it was considered the flower crown of the river Saraswati. 14. She began to bathe 3 times daily, and thus her curling black hair gradually became grey. Due to austerity, her body gradually became thin, and she wore old garments. 15. The home and household paraphernalia of Kardama, who was one of the Prajapatis, was developed in such a way, by dint of his mystic powers of austerity and yoga, that his opulence was sometimes envied by those who travel in outer space in airplanes. 16. The opulence of the household of Kardama Muni is described herein. The bed sheets and mattresses were all as white as the foam of milk. The chairs and benches were made of ivory and were covered by cloths of lace with golden filigree, and the couches were made of gold and had very soft pillows. Verse 17. The walls of the house were made of first-class marble, decorated with valuable jewels. There was no need of light, for the household was illuminated by the rays of these jewels. The female members of the household were all amply decorated with jewelry. Verse 18. The compound of the main household was surrounded by beautiful gardens with sweet fragrant flowers and many trees which produced fresh fruit and were tall and beautiful. The attraction of such gardens was that singing birds would sit on the trees, and their charming voices, as well as the humming sound of the bees, made the whole atmosphere as pleasing as possible. 19. When Devahuti would enter that lovely garden to take her bath in the pond filled with lotus flowers, the associates of the denizens of heaven, the Gandharvas, would sing about Kardama's glorious household life. Her great husband Kardama gave her all protection at all times. Verse 20. Although her position was unique from all points of view, saintly Devahuti, in spite of all her possessions, which were envied even by the ladies of the heavenly planets, gave up all such comforts. She was only sorry that her great son was separated from her. 21. Devahuti's husband had already left home and accepted the renounced order of life, and then her only son, Kapila, left home. Although she knew all the truths of life and death, and although her heart was cleansed of all dirt, she was very aggrieved at the loss of her son, just as a cow is affected when her calf dies. Verse 22. O Vidura, thus always meditating upon her son, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Kapila Dev, she very soon became unattached to her nicely decorated home. Verse 23. Thereafter, having heard with great eagerness and in all detail from her son Kapila Dev, the eternally smiling personality of Godhead, Devahuti began to meditate constantly upon the Vishnu form of the Supreme Lord. verses 24 and 25. She did so with serious engagement in devotional service. Because she was strong in renunciation, she accepted only the necessities of the body. She became situated in knowledge due to realization of the absolute truth. Her heart became purified. She became fully absorbed in meditation upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and all misgivings due to the modes of material nature disappeared. Verse 26, her mind became completely engaged in the Supreme Lord, and she automatically realized the knowledge of the impersonal Brahman. As a Brahman realized soul, she was freed from the designations of the materialistic concept of life. Thus all material pangs disappeared, and she attained transcendental bliss. Verse 27, situated in eternal trance and freed from illusion impelled by the modes of material nature, she forgot her material body, just as one forgets his different bodies in a dream. 28. Her body was being taken care of by the spiritual damsels created by her husband Kardama, and since she had no mental anxiety at that time, her body did not become thin. She appeared just like a fire surrounded by smoke. Verse 29. Because she was always absorbed in the thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, she was not aware that her hair was sometimes loosened or her garments were disarrayed. Yeah, okay, so let's go through the verses with the purports. 13. As instructed by her son, Devahuti also began to practice Bhakti Yoga in that very ashram. She practiced Samadhi in the house of Kardama Muni, which was so beautifully decorated with flowers that it was considered the flower crown of the river Saraswati. So, Srila Prabhupada comments here that Devahuti didn't leave home. Her husband had left home. Now Kapila is leaving home, but she doesn't leave home. And Prabhupada explains that it is not recommended. It is not recommended. Prabhupada says it is never recommended for a woman to leave her home. Yeah, she's always best off in a dependent situation. So, and Prabhupada describes when she was married, or before she was married, she was under the care of her father, Swayambhuva Manu. Then Swayambhuva gave her to Kardama in charity, so she's married to him. And so she was under the care of her husband in her youth. And then now her son Kapila was born, and Kardama, of course, left home immediately. So she was under the care of Kapila for the time being. But now after he's discharged his duty, then he also left. And obviously she could have left, but she didn't, because she knew this is not how ladies live. So rather she remained at home and began practicing Bhakti Yoga as Kapila had instructed her. And in this way, the home became just very glorious and very beautiful. 14. She began to bathe 3 times daily, and thus her curling black hair gradually became gray. Due to austerity, her body gradually became thin, and she wore old garments. Let's have a look at the purport here. So Prabhupada makes the point that the yogis, means basically the Ashtanga yogis more than anything, brahmacharis, vanaprasthas, and sannyasis bathe at least 3 times a day, early morning, noontime, and evening. And even some grihastas do that, especially if they're advanced Brahmins. So Devahuti was a king's daughter, of course, Swayambhuva Manu. And Kardama was not a king, but despite that, he made the palace for her by his mystical power. He made it extremely comfortable, just like a palace. Definitely just like a palace, with maid servants, all opulence, as kings live. But because she had learnt austerity from a husband, it wasn't difficult for her to be austere. Prabhupada makes the point, to be too fat is not very good for spiritually advanced life. Rather, one should reduce, because if you become fat, it's an impediment for spiritual progress, spiritual understanding. So Prabhupada, referring actually to Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada makes the point, one should be careful not to eat too much, sleep too much, or remain in a comfortable position. If we voluntarily, Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, voluntarily accepting some penances and difficulties, one should take less food and less sleep. These are the procedures for practicing any kind of yoga, whether Bhakti yoga, Jnana yoga, or Hatha yoga. Verse 15. The home and household paraphernalia of Kardama, who was one of the Prajapatis, was developed in such a way by dint of his mystic powers of austerity and yoga that his opulence was sometimes envied by those who travel in outer space in airplanes. So Prabhupada explains that this is referring to the denizens of heaven, demigods. They were envious of Kardama's opulence. And Prabhupada makes the point that, of course, their airships were not like ours. Ours fly from one country to another. There, the denizens of heaven, their airships fly from one planet to another. And the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada says the Bhagavatam talks quite a lot about that. And we've already seen a number of places where this has been discussed, and we're going to see more as time goes on, as we go deeper into the Bhagavatam. So our planes and our space vehicles are very slow, but Kardama's, it was an airship like a city, and he was able to go to different heavenly planets just like that. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, that was not an ordinary airplane, nor was it ordinary space travel. Because Kardama Muni was such a powerful mystic yogi, his opulence was envied by the denizens of heaven. So on we go to verse 16. The opulence of the household of Kardama Muni is described herein. The bed sheets and mattresses were all as white as the foam of milk. The chairs and benches were made of ivory and were covered by cloths of lace with golden filigree. And the couches were made of gold and had very soft pillows. There's no purport to 16. Let us go on to verse 17. The walls of the house were made of first-class marble, decorated with valuable jewels. There was no need of light, for the household was illuminated by the rays of these jewels. The female members of the household were all amply decorated with jewelry. Right, let's have a look at the purport. Prabhupada makes the point that opulence in household life, a standard of opulence in household life, means there should be jewels, ivory, marble, furniture of gold and jewels. There should be cloths decorated with gold filigree, means very, very fine sewing of gold. Not like today, where we have plastic and base metals. So in Vedic civilization, everything in the house had to be valued. And if the need arose any time, some extraordinary, difficult situation arose where one needed money to to do something, then all these things could be exchanged immediately. And they're all extremely valuable, so you could easily get large amount of money just like that. So even Prabhupada says, thus, one's broken and unwanted furniture and paraphernalia would never be without value. Because there's gold, there's jewels, and all these things. So Prabhupada says, this system is still followed by Indians in household affairs. They keep metal utensils and golden ornaments, silver plates, valuable silk garments with gold embroidery. And in the case of need, they can have some money in exchange immediately. And Prabhupada says, there he concludes the purport, there are exchanges for the money lenders and the householders. So on we go to verse 18. The compound of the main household was surrounded by beautiful gardens with sweet, fragrant flowers and many trees which produced fresh fruit and were tall and beautiful. The attraction of such gardens was that singing birds could sit on the trees, and their charming voices, as well as the humming sound of the bees, made the whole atmosphere as pleasing as possible. There's no purport to verse 18, so on we go to verse 19. When Devahuti would enter that lovely garden to take her bath in the pond filled with lotus flowers, the associates of the denizens of heaven, the Gandharvas, would sing about Karadama's glorious household life. Her great husband Karadama gave her all protection at all times. So let's have a look at the purport. And Prabhupada's elaboration is giving a nice description of the ideal husband-wife relationship. So Karadama gave Devahuti all sorts of comforts as husband, but he wasn't attached to her. As soon as the sun was there, actually, as soon as the son, Prabhupada says, was grown up, but it wasn't even grown up. As soon as basically he was born, he left home. Karadama left home. So similarly, Devahuti was a princess, very qualified, very beautiful, but was completely dependent on the protection of her husband. So Prabhupada refers to Manu Samhita, that according to Manu, women, the fair sex, should not have independence at any stage of life. And we just discussed again, childhood under father, youth under husband, old age under grown children. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Devahuti demonstrated all these statements of the Manu Samhita in her life. As a child, she was dependent on her father. Later, she was dependent on her husband in spite of her opulence. And she was later on dependent on her son, Kapila Dev. So devotees, on we go, verse 20. Although her position was unique from all points of view, saintly Devahuti, in spite of all her possessions, which were envied even by the ladies of the heavenly planets, gave up all such comforts. She was only sorry that her great son was separated from her. So that's an interesting point. Prabhupada talks about it in the purport, that Devahuti was not sorry to give up material comforts. She had lived previously, I'm sure you remember, she had lived the most extremely austere life. So this was not something new or, some sort of special challenge for her. But separation from her son, that was a challenge. So Prabhupada makes the point, we might wonder, why is she so attached to her son? The answer is actually in the next verse, and it's because he was not an ordinary son, he was actually the Lord. There's a sort of a lesson we can learn there, that one can give up all material attachments, but only when there's attachment to the Lord. Only when there's attachment to the Lord. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, this is explained in Bhagavad Gita, Param Drishtva Nivartante, Bhagavad Gita 259. Which says, only when one actually has some taste for spiritual existence can he be reluctant to follow the materialistic way of life. Verse 21, Devahuti's husband had already left home and accepted the renounced order of life. And then her only son, Kapila, left home. Although she knew all the truths of life and death, and although her heart was cleansed of all dirt, she was very aggrieved at the loss of her son, just as a cow is affected when her calf dies. So let's go into the purport here. Prabhupada begins by saying, a woman whose husband is away from home or has actually accepted the renounced order of life, such a woman should not be very sorry, because she still has his representative, her son, representative of her husband. And the Vedas say, Prabhupada quotes, Atmaiva putro jayate. The husband's body is represented by the son. And therefore it's considered that a woman has never been widowed. She is not a widow if she has a grown son, even if the husband passed away. Or at least, generally, at least left home. So Devahuti was not affected when Kapila Dev was there, but when he left, she was afflicted. She grieved, not because of the worldly relationship, but because of her love for the Lord. That was their relationship. He is the Lord. She knew that. Now he's gone. She's separated from the Lord, not just her son. We go on to the second paragraph. And Prabhupada says, the example given here is that Devahuti became just like a cow who's lost her calf. Because a cow who's lost her calf cries day and night. So similarly, Devahuti was aggrieved and cried. And she was even requesting her friends and relatives, please bring my son home so that I may live. otherwise I may die, otherwise I shall die. So this intense affection for the Lord, although it's manifested as apparently love for her son, it's actually spiritually beneficial because it's feelings of affection for the Lord. So, but otherwise, Prabhupada at the end of this paragraph says, attachment for a material son keeps one in the material world, but when transferred to the Lord, it elevates one to the spiritual world in the association of the Lord. So then the third paragraph, Prabhupada makes an interesting point. Every woman can qualify herself as much as Devahuti and then have the Lord as his son. So if he can appear as the son of Devahuti, he can also appear as the son of any woman, provided she's qualified. Why not? Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, if one gets the Supreme Lord as a son, one can have the benefit of bringing up a nice son in this world, and at the same time get promotion to the spiritual world to become the face-to-face associate of the personality of Godhead. Verse 22. O Vidura, thus always meditating upon her son, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Kapila Dev, she very soon became unattached to a nicely decorated home. Right, so Prabhupada makes a very nice point that this is a practical example of how you can elevate yourself in Krishna consciousness. That Kapila is Krishna, but he appeared as the son of Devahuti. And after he left home, Devahuti was absorbed in thought of him. And so, therefore, she's always Krishna conscious. Her constant Krishna consciousness enabled her to be detached from home. So, second paragraph, if we can't transfer our attachment to the Lord, there's no possibility of becoming free from material attachment. And Bhagavatam confirms that it's not possible to become liberated by empiric speculation, that simply knowing your spirit soul or Brahman doesn't actually purify the intelligence. So therefore, even if an impersonalist reaches the highest platform of spiritual realization, he falls down again to material attachment because of not being situated in the transcendental loving service of the Supreme Lord. Third paragraph, the devotees follow the devotional process of hearing and chanting, and so always remember the beautiful form of the Lord. By rendering service, by becoming a friend or servant, or just offering everything to the Lord, one can enter the kingdom of God. Bhagavad Gita makes the point, tato mam tattvato gyatva. After doing devotional service, one can understand the Lord in fact, and thus become eligible to enter his association in the spiritual world. Verse 23. Thereafter, having heard with great eagerness and in all detail from her son Kapila Dev, the eternally smiling personality of Godhead, Devahuti began to meditate constantly upon the Vishnu form of the Supreme Lord. Verses 24 and 25. She did so with serious engagement in devotional service, because she was strong in renunciation She accepted only the necessities of the body. She became situated in knowledge due to realization of the absolute truth. Her heart became purified. She became fully absorbed in meditation upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And all misgivings due to the modes of material nature disappeared. Verse 26, her mind became completely engaged in the Supreme Lord, and she automatically realized the knowledge of the impersonal Brahman. As a Brahman-realized soul, she was freed from the designations of the materialistic concept of life. Thus, all material pangs disappeared, and she attained transcendental bliss. So there's a fairly extensive purport here. So, Prabhupada begins the purport by pointing out that the previous verse said that Devahuti was already conversant with the absolute truth. So if that's the case, why was she meditating? The explanation is that when one theoretically discusses the absolute truth, one becomes situated in an impersonal concept. Similarly, when we discuss the form, qualities, pastimes, etc. of the Lord, one becomes situated in meditation on him. So if one has complete knowledge of the Lord, knowledge of Brahman is automatically realized. Supreme truth is realized from three angles of vision: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So if one is in knowledge of the Lord, it implies you know Supersoul and Brahman. Just as an example which Prabhupada gives to illustrate this point is that if you have $100, your $10 problem is solved. Even your $50 problem is no longer a problem if you've got $100. Yeah. So if you realized the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then the idea is that the Supreme Personality of Godhead includes Paramatma and Brahman. So when you realize the Supreme Lord Krishna, you must know Supersoul and Brahman. You have to. Second paragraph. So Bhagavad Gita says Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma, unless you're freed from Maya and situated in Brahman, there's no question of understanding devotional service or engaging in it. But one who is doing devotional service is understood to have already realized Brahman, as that is included, knowledge of Brahman is included in knowledge of the Lord. And this, of course, is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 14:27, famous verse, Brahmano hi pratishtaham. Yeah, Krishna is saying, I am the source of Brahman. It's come from me. And the Lord, generally, you'll see that this is the understanding we're given. So, and the concept of the Lord does not depend on Brahman, like we must go through the Brahman stage, then we can go on to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's not like that. You just focus on the Supreme Lord Krishna, and you will realize these other two levels, Brahman and Paramatma. So the Vishnu Purana, Prabhupada says the Vishnu Purana also confirms that one who has taken shelter of the all auspicious Supreme Lord, not suspicious, all auspicious form of the Lord, Supreme Lord, is already situated in the understanding of Brahman. In other words, one who is a Vaishnav is already a Brahman. So third paragraph. Another significant point here is that one has to observe the rules and regulations. Yuktahara viharasya, as Bhagavad Gita says. When you do devotional service, you still have to eat, you still have to sleep. Obviously, these are necessities of the body, but they're done in a regulated way. Eating Krishna prasadam, sleeping according to regulative principles. And the idea is to reduce sleeping and eating and just have enough of these things to keep the body fit. So sex life also must be reduced. It's only for producing Krishna-conscious children. Otherwise, no sex life at all. Yeah. So, Prabhupada says, nothing is prohibited, but everything is made yukta, or regulated, with the higher purpose always in mind. That's really good. So by following the rules and regulations, one becomes purified. Misconceptions from ignorance become zero. And it's mentioned here that the causes, right at the end of the paragraph, the causes of material entanglement, they're completely vanquished by becoming Krishna conscious. So on to the fourth paragraph, and then the fifth, and then the sixth. How's that? It is a substantial purport. So Prabhupada says the Sanskrit statement anatha nivritti indicates that the body is unwanted. How's that? The body is unwanted because we are spirit soul. And we're not these bodies. And we've never needed these bodies. But because we wanted to enjoy the material body, we have this body through the material energy under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But as soon as we're reestablished in our original position as the servant of the Lord, we begin to forget the necessities of life and then forget the body. 5. Sometimes in a dream we get a body for working in the dream. I may dream I'm flying in the sky, or I've gone to the forest, or some place. But as soon as we wake up, we forget these subtle bodies, the bodies which are active in our sleeping state, particularly the dreaming state. So similarly, when we're Krishna conscious, we forget the changes of this body. The bodily necessities become secondary, and we just become more absorbed in devotional service. So actually, the activities of devotional service are the cause for being situated in transcendence. Lord is the soul of every one. Bhagavad Gita says he is the seed of all living entities, seed-giving Father. By taking shelter of him by devotional service, we become fully situated in the concept of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So as Kapila says, one who is in full Krishna consciousness, is immediately saturated with love of God as soon as he hears about the transcendental qualities of the Lord. Paragraph 6. We'll finish this purport. So Devahuti was fully instructed by her son how to focus her mind on the Lord in detail. So now she's following those instructions, and she's contemplating the form of the Lord within herself with devotional love. So this is the point. Ultimately, we have to be fully absorbed in thought of the Lord. and meditate on him constantly. That's the highest perfection. Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, Bhagavad Gita confirms that one who's always absorbed in such a way is to be considered the topmost yogi. So on to paragraph 7. The real purpose of the processes of transcendental realization, be they Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, is to come to devotional service. And if we simply develop knowledge of Brahman or the Supersoul without devotional service, then we're laboring without getting any real result. Prabhupada, as he has done before, gives the example of beating the husk of a piece of a wheat plant, but the grain has already been removed. So you can beat that husk as much as you like, but you won't really get anything of value. So unless we understand the Lord to be the goal, it's valueless. There's no point in speculating or doing mystic yoga. Yeah. So in Ashtanga Yoga, the 7th stage is dhyana. In devotional service, it's the 3rd stage, Prabhupada says. So there are 9 stages in devotional service. First is hearing, then chanting, then contemplating. So it's the 3rd process. So if we execute devotional service, one automatically becomes an expert jnani and or a yogi. So in other words, jnana and yoga and transcendental realization, they are preliminary steps in the process of devotional service. And the 8th paragraph, Devahuti is expert in accepting the real substance. She contemplated the form of Lord Vishnu in detail, as advised by her smiling son Kapila Dev. At the same time, she was thinking of him, the Lord, and she completely perfected her austerities, penances, and transcendental realization. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.